The next structure we're going to look at is a partnership. And a partnership really lies somewhere between a sole owner and a company, if you think about it. So while a sole owner is about one person, and a company is about bringing lots of people from different backgrounds together to form a business venture often, it already allows that. In between we have the partnership, which has a moderate amount of people involved in it together. Similarly, the requirements of it are they're not quite as low as what's a sole trader. You know, you want some kind of partnership agreement, but they're not as high as what you want in terms of a company. So it's a lot easier to set up than a company, particularly if you want to bring lots of people together. The big important thing to remember about partnership, this is the critical aspect, is when you have a partnership, you have the people coming together to run the business, but they form a mutual agency. So that mutual agency means that each partner is a principal and agent of the other partners. So it means that they can make decisions that bind the other parties. So like a sole trader, it's not a separate legal entity. However, you know, the person can go out and bind other people. So if you're a sole trader and you sign a contract, it's only relevant to you, right? You're the one who's going to pay. However, if you're a partner and you go out and sign a contract as part of business, or you're negligent in what you do, the other partners are going to have to pay for it if you can't. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so if we had our sole trader here, and they go out and they sign a contract with party X, okay, so they sign a contract with X, then who owes the money? Who owes the money is the sole trader, and only the sole trader. Now, the difference that we have in a partnership is that we often have this person, so we'll call them partner, and we'll have this person who's a partner, and this person is a partner. Now, they're actually in this form of entity, the partnership, right? And what happens is if this partner here goes out and signs a contract with X, so there's a contract here. It's not just for contracts, it can be for negligence, as I mentioned before. But by the nature of this partnership, it actually means that all of these partners are in a mutual form of agency. You'll remember from week 2 we were talking about agency, and we're going to talk about that in a separate podcast. But it means the principal has delegated to the agent the ability to act on their behalf. And this relationship is central to what's occurring in this partnership here. Now, as the result of that, if we have P1 and P2 and P3, so partner 1, partner 2, partner 3, if partner 3, right, is responsible for this money here, if they enter a contract for these dollars, right, then who owes? Who owes the dollars? In this case, partner 3, they sign the contract, but also partner 2 and partner 1, because P's contract binds P3, partner 3's contract. So this contract here, partner 3's contract, binds partner 1 and partner 2. So that really is the essence of partnership and what you need to understand about the legal relationship when a partnership is actually formed. So what we have is this mutual agency where they bind each other. So we don't have any formal steps that we need when we form a partnership. It can just happen. And it's a relationship where people are carrying on a business in common with a view to a profit. I'm going to go through that in more detail in a minute, because that definition is absolutely critical. It's particularly critical because at times you might not think you're entering into a partnership, but you actually are. To have a partnership, you then need to have all of those elements of the definition satisfied. So you need to go through and make sure that you're satisfying each aspect of that phrase, not just one or two, they all need to be satisfied, and then you have one even if you didn't think that you actually did. So let's look at those aspects of the definition that we actually need. So we need to make sure that there are persons, and there can't be more than 20. Well, there can in certain kinds of partnerships, but for our purposes, in normal businesses, there can only be 20. So it's limiting the number of people that we can have. Second, they need to be carrying on a business. Now, this is a little bit tricky. What you need is repetition, not just a one-off venture. So if we decided to put some money together and to buy some shares or to buy a block of land that we were going to sell, that's probably not going to be a partnership. It's probably not going to be a partnership because it's a one-off transaction. We pool our money, we buy it, we sell it, that's it. What you need is this essence of carrying on a business. Carrying on a business involves multiple transactions, or at least the intent for multiple transactions. So just say we decided to become land developers and we bought one block of land, sold it, split the money. If we had intended to make multiple transactions, then that could be a partnership. Okay, so it's not about having one transaction or two or three, it's about the intention, one off versus many. Now, and then even if you just have one transaction, if you intended it to be a partnership, then it can be a partnership. And so that situation is exactly what happened in Smith and Anderson. So let's just think about what happened in the case of Smith and Anderson. What we have in Smith and Anderson is that we have a trust set up. So we won't go into the details of trust yet, we'll come to that. So we have this trust set up. And what we have are all these subscribers or investors. So subscriber, right, and I'm just going to write that they're an S. And then they put all their money, they all put money into this trust. And then at the time, there was a big go on a kind of business, submarine telegraphs. Okay, so what does that mean? It means if you had Australia and you had America, you can see my geography is fantastic, you would put a submarine cable between them under the ocean, submarine cable for the phone calls, etc. So that's what's going on. That's the kind of business that we're actually involved in. So they put all this money in and they bought shares in a number of submarine telegraph companies who were doing this. Now, some things went wrong in the investment. People didn't get what they wanted. And one of the people tries to argue, should it be, well, technically, remember how a partnership requires less than 20 people. Okay, so we're going to have less than 20 people to be a partnership. So one of the investors says, hey, there's actually 4,000 people here. Because there's 4,000, that's more than 20, so really we should wind this up because this partnership has too many people. So for them to make this case, to say, look, I want my money back, I want this wound up, because it's not really a partnership because we've got too many people for our rule of 20 to be a partnership, they've got to say, is this actually a partnership? So is this transaction, is this a partnership? And the court said no. And why did they say no? It's one transaction. And so because it's one transaction, it's not carrying on a business. Okay, so we can see the critical element here is whether you're carrying on the business, the repetition, rather than the investment itself. So the next element we have to make out is that you're carrying on the business in person. Carrying on a business in common. So in common means that you're holding each other to be mutually liable. And that's that essence of that relationship we talked about before. So it's not about whether you're doing anything, whether you're acting in common, because you can actually be a silent partner. A silent partner might have be playing no part whatsoever in the business, but they can still actually be liable for what's going on. What this in common is about is the fact that you mean to bind each other as part of the relationship. I'll talk about in a moment some of the signs of agency or not having agency, but one of them is, are you sharing gross profit or revenue versus net profit, or what's left over after you pay your expenses? This in common, if you're splitting what's left over after expenses, it starts to say that you've got a partnership. Why? Because you're both responsible for all the expenses. So that's the in common, right? When someone's incurring an expense, they're incurring it for everyone involved in the partnership. That's different if you're just splitting the gross revenue, the turnover, if you will, and then you're each responsible for your own expenses. You're not acting on behalf of the others. So that difference, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, but that's really central to this in common, whether you're actually looking to bind someone else as part of what you're doing. So one of the cases to help us figure this out is an interesting case about a classic Australian band, AC/DC, the makers of the second largest selling album of all time after Michael Jackson's Thriller, Back in Black. And the case is Giorgio and Dunn. And so what happens? So we form this AC/DC cover band, and it was formed by Giorgio and Dunn. Now, what actually goes on? So they form it, and really Dunn was the person actually behind the idea for the band. So they have the bright idea. Let's form this AC/DC cover band. And so he gets DiGiorgio. And DiGiorgio says, look, we were partners in this idea that Dunn actually had. And then the court had to work out, well, are they partners or are they not? So they look at what they're actually doing. So are they carrying on a business together? And they said, look, they're not actually doing it together and in common. Why? Well, who paid all the establishment costs? I looked at that. Who paid for everything? Dunn had actually paid for it, all of that himself. DiGiorgio, what did DiGiorgio put in? Well, he'd actually put in zero. Then also, how were they paid? So they look at the costs. Well, that should be underneath there. So they look at the costs, and then they look at how were they paid. And DiGiorgio was actually paid dollars per gig, for want of a better term. So he'd actually been paid a fixed fee per performance, for every performance. But Dunn wasn't. Dunn was paid the profit. Okay? So you can see that really DiGiorgio here, there's no risk for DiGiorgio. There's no money. There's no share in the profit or a loss if it actually occurs. He gets paid a certain amount of money. Dunn had come up with the idea, paid all the establishment costs, and actually only got paid if they made a profit. So really, therefore, they're saying that here the court made the decision that there's actually no agency because they're not carrying on a business in common. The lack of commonality. Central to that commonality, what's happening to the profit, what's happening to the costs. In here, it's being borne by the one individual, Dunn. So they're the ones who are actually running the business, not a partnership. The final thing that we need to look at in a partnership is we need to make sure that we're running it for a profit. So if you're running it for a not-for-profit cause, for a religious organisation, for those kind of things, you might have an unincorporated association, but you're probably not going to have a partnership. Well, you're not going to have a partnership because you're not running it for a profit. So that's what we need. We need 20 people or less, unless we're one of those exempted special professional organisations. We need to be carrying on a business, not just a one-off joint venture or a one-off investment. We need to be doing it in common, where we're binding each other, and we need to have a view for a profit. They're the essential elements about what we need. I said also before that there are some indicators about whether you've got a partnership or not. And here are some of the most common ones and whether they help us figure something out. The first one is, if you co-own property, do you have a partnership? And the answer is not necessarily, right? You can co-own a house and share the rent, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've got a partnership. You've got to show the willingness to bind each other around decisions for there to be a partnership. In a similar way, you can look at the sharing of gross profit. Now, if you're just splitting the profits, then you probably actually don't have a partnership. And a good case to help us out to understand this difference about the sharing of gross returns is Cox and Colson. What happens in Cox and Colson? Okay, so in Cox and Colson, we have three parties. We have Colson, we have Cox, and we have Mills. Okay. Now, what happens in partnership often is that it's about one partner not being able to pay for something. So in this instance, what actually happened was there was a theatre company and there was a play, and the play involved there being a gun used in as part of the play. And Cox was in the audience. He was an audience member. Mills was in charge of the play and got all the actors together and decided what play to do, etc. So as part of the play going on, they fired this gun and it injured Cox. So Cox gets injured by Mills as part of the play. Now, the arrangement for the play had been made between Colson and Mills. Colson had actually rented a big theatre. Okay, so Colson has gone and rented the theatre for the play to actually take place in. And Mills had actually supplied all of the actors in the play, etc. So he'd got the talent together, decided what show would actually go on. Colson took care of the logistics of what they were actually going to rent. Colson was going to get 60% of the take from the box office. So this is really about the box office or revenue. And Mills got 40% of the box office. So what happens? Cox gets injured by the gun in the play and probably goes to sue Mills, who doesn't have any money. So he's not going to get any money. So what does Cox try and do? Cox tries to sue Colson. And what he says is, you actually have here a partnership. So Cox asserts, you've got a partnership to put on this play. You were doing it together. You were sharing the profits. And if there's a partnership, then Colson will have to pay for the injury. Okay? Colson will have to pay if this is a partnership because he's bound by the negligence of Mills. What did the court find in this particular instance? They said no partnership. And why was there no partnership? There was no partnership because you can see here, this split, the split here was about gross profit. So Colson had to pay, got 60%, but they had to pay theatre costs. Mills got 40%, but then had to pay for all the actors, sets, etc. So what we can see here is that there was no mutual agency in this relationship. There was no carrying on in common of what was occurring. So again, the idea of gross profits is not a sign of agency. However, if you see net profits being shared, with some exceptions set out in your textbook, receipt of a share of the net profits is prima facie evidence that we actually have a partnership. So partnerships then are these contractual relationships between each other. That contractual relationships, like all contracts, doesn't necessarily need to be in writing. It can be partly oral. It can be implied from the conduct of the parties. That's why you can end up in a partnership, even if you didn't start out that way. It's important then, if you're going to enter a partnership, to have a written partnership agreement to make things clear. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's a good way to go, having a written partnership agreement. It can set out who's in the partner, who the partners are, what the name of the partnership, the nature of the business, the term of the partnership, partners' contributions, how you're going to share profits and loss, who has authority among the partners, how you make decisions, your duties, obligations, how you admit new partners, how a partner leaves, or what happens if a partner dies, how you resolve disputes. So if you have something written, you have a much more solid understanding of your rights and responsibilities and how to resolve disputes. And if you're going to be in a partnership, it's a great way to go. Have a look then at the iStudy activity. Remember that we have these advantages of a partnership: little formality, more people to contribute ideas, more sources of capital with more people. Disadvantages: unlimited liability, mutual agency, right? You're bound by what the other people do. Not only that, you have less control as an owner. And that's probably a good summary of partnership.